I had this just one article called From Biracial to Triracial by Eduardo Bonilla-Silva. This scholar he is a prominent sociologist and also a professor at Duke. And he analyzed both racial dynamics and systemic racism, and specifically talked about the evolution of racial stratification from a biracial society, which is how we traditionally conceptualize race in terms of black and white, to a triracial system that challenged traditional views of racial classification. So as I go through, we'll talk about what Bonilla-Silva said that triracial system looks like. But first, just historical precedent, that there's a historical biracial order. He starts from that assumption, which I think is a pretty fair assumption. He says that historically the United States viewed race primarily in terms of black and white. And that idea that you're either black or white, even if you are not descended from Africa or descended from Europe, but this idea that you're either black or white is a perspective that has shaped us socially, economically, and politically. If you think back to even what Lamar was saying about the white racial consciousness and Crenshaw and all of that, looked at those different areas, socially, politically, economically, all of that viewed in terms of black and white. And then historically, that central role of African Americans from slavery to civil rights, we've been central to the idea of national identity and economic structures, because blackness has been positioned in direct opposition to whiteness. If you look back at the very first articles that we read in here, we saw that when we were first encountered in Africa by Europeans, it was that juxtaposition. Look how we look how we act. It was always black versus white, that juxtaposition of black and white. But what he talks about is that the transition to a triracial system, that the demographic changes in the United States, which Corey literally was just talking about, the change in the population, the growth in the population of minorities, and that even that threat that Professor Onwudiwe was talking about, discusses the significant changes in our demographics, the rise in not just the black population, but the Asian and especially the Latino populations, people who are religiously Catholic, people who have a high tendency to cohabitate and to procreate, especially the Latino population, who challenge that old biracial model, because they are, especially in like the South where we are, they are continuing to populate, as are we. What that creates is increasing racial and ethnic complexity. So we've got higher rates. We just have not just more babies that aren't white, but we also have higher rates of interracial marriages. My brother's married to a white girl. I don't like it, but he did it. So we got higher rates of interracial marriages, growing ideas of multicultural identities. And the evidence of that is in the census. You know, we can see it, we eyeball it, we can look at it and see it in society just looking through the restaurants. But this is actually data that's reported by the census. We've got more interracial marriages, interracial families, biracial, interracial children. And so that creates this multicultural identity that we have now. And so what he outlined was this triracial hierarchy. So now it's not just black juxtaposed against white. We've got a hierarchy where at the top there are whites. In the middle is what he calls honorary whites. And then at the bottom, he's got what we call collective blacks. And so at the top of the food chain, there's the people, the whites. That's the people who continue to enjoy the highest socioeconomic benefits and the least racial prejudice. Think of your multi-generation American whites, or even your like European, like British immigrants who come over, but that speak perfect English, that are Christian, you know, those types of people. They are white, no question about their whiteness. But then he says you've also got these honorary whites, which is a new middle category. Those are your lighter skinned Latinos, and y'all have seen how they treat us sometimes. Your lighter skinned Latinos who can pass. Some Asians, maybe not some of the Japanese, definitely not the Vietnamese, but the Chinese, And then some Middle Eastern Americans as well, who are starting to experience varying degrees of social acceptance and access to white privilege. They're climbing the ladder. They're sending their kids to private school. They're living in white neighborhoods, and they may not look all the way white, but they are close enough that they could satisfy this category of honorary whites. And then he says that we've got the collective blacks. That's your dark-skinned Latinos. They look like they work outside. Your Jay-Z would call them your field, and then so traditional African Americans, that's, most of us, and then certain Asian groups like the Vietnamese and Hmong, who have generally faced historically and then even now more significant socioeconomic challenges and discrimination. If you look at the Asians and you look at the jobs that Chinese have, like doctors, engineers, and then you look at the Asians who are like working in the nail shops, they're coming to own the nail shops, but it's like us. It's a slow burn, a slow process to climb up that socioeconomic ladder, as opposed to like some other Asians. And that all relates back to historical and critical race theory, as Lamar was saying. And then go ahead, Professor. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, I think that's good advice. We need to talk about that with our group so we can work on that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Oh, no problem. And I like it too. And I think that what you're saying is absolutely correct, because it also comes with an attitude of elitism and superiority. So I think that's exactly right. And just going forward with that, it also comes with the socioeconomic implications you see, just as the professor was saying, in his neighborhood, you see income and employment disparities. And he gives this analysis in the article about the distinct income divides among these racial strata. The honorary whites generally have more earning, higher employment rates, and more skilled professions than those at the bottom, who are the collective blacks. Same with educational attainments. Asian Americans, as part of the honorary whites, often surpass whites in educational achievements, which contrasts sharply with the educational achievements faced by the collective blacks. And again, that doesn't mean that we aren't achieving educationally. We are. But if you just look at like those collective categories, that's what the author is talking about. So, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. 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 Right. Mm-hmm. I agree, Professor, for sure. And so, just some critiques and counter arguments of Bonilla-Silva, even though I think his analysis is pretty fresh. But there's some criticism of oversimplification. Just as with the biracial model, they criticize, saying that it's oversimplified and it overlooks the complexities of intergroup differences and individual identity. And of course, we are not all the same. And we know that. And again, as Professor said, it's our job and our obligation to describe ourselves. And then also the debate over the long-term viability of this idea. If biracial is sort of becoming obsolete, what again happens to triracial? Will that adequately capture the dynamic and the evolving nature of race? Or if that's just a transitional phase, if eventually we're going to adopt some other sort of multicultural model or idea. So I just dropped that. And then this is my conclusion. I think this is my last slide. I'm done. Just summarizing America's shifting racial order, moving from biracial to triracial, showing how diverse the society is and how complex the societal structure is. Go back to that triangle. Influence of racial and social policies, how we need a new approach. That's the idea, that because society is changing, there has to be a new approach in our scholarship so that we can accommodate for that. The implications that it has, educational reform, we've talked about preaching the truth in schools, critical race theory, all those things, teaching children their history. I heard all of you guys hitting on those points, including diverse racial perspectives, and not just from the teacher. Like, I teach a lot of things in high school that I'm probably not, like, they're probably technically illegal in Texas. But I think that being able to solidify that into policy, to say that teaching that curricula is okay, and equitable admission policies, which are also under attack. By teaching affirmative action is under attack, diversity inclusion policies are under attack, all those things that are being decided by the Supreme Court, or have been decided by the Supreme Court, or are working their way up there. Enhancing workplace diversity, of course, you guys talked about your Black women supervisors, and obviously we need more of that. Social policies, adjusting housing, healthcare, Lumar hit on that as well, so I don't need to go over that again. And then this was just for us, and Professor Onwudiwe talked a little bit about some stuff we could present at the conference, which is good because we need that, because we don't have our abstract in. But ongoing research, things that are essential for adapting policies to the realities of America's changing racial landscape. We're changing, we need to adapt. And then policy reform, to continue to evaluate, that sort of goes back to the critique, to continue to evaluate, to ensure that the ideas that we have and the policies we make are still effective based on the times. And so that's all I have. If you guys have comments or questions, great. If not, we'll move on to Oria Lua Ladoja.